vital questions still linger over Ben Stoke's trial amid dispute between police and the CPS. Today, Ben Stokes is due to take to the pitch for England against India in the third test at Trent Bridge. If he does so, it will mark the end of an extraordinary week for the 27-year-old all-rounder. On Tuesday, he found himself standing in the dock of Bristol Crown Court waiting to hear whether or not he would face a possible jail sentence for affray. He had been accused of punching two men unconscious, shattering the eye socket of one in the process. Since his arrest last September, Stokes had maintained he had acted in self-defense, stepping in to protect two gay men who claimed to have been subjected to homophobic abuse. Cleared by the jury, his lawyer said afterwards that their verdict fairly reflected the truth of what happened that night. But if Stokes had hoped that was the end of the matter, he will be rather disappointed. Evidence presented to the court painted an unedifying picture of what happened after Stokes and teammate Alex Hales had headed out on the town to celebrate a victory over the West Indies in Bristol. It is claimed that Stokes downed at least 10 alcoholic drinks before unleashing a foul-mouthed tirade at a bouncer and then mocking two gay men, Kai Berry and William O'Connor. That same pair were then allegedly subjected to homophobic abuse by two other men, Ryan Hale and Ryan Ollie, prompting Stokes to intervene. Ben Stokes, Mr. Hale and Mr. Ollie were all subsequently charged with affray. Despite all three men being acquitted, a number of questions have since arisen about how the case was conducted. From absent witnesses to absent defendants, and last-minute charges to lingering memory lapses, here the Daily Mail asks some serious questions about the trial that shocked the sporting world. Why was Stokes charged with affray and not assault? The decision to charge Stokes with affray, rather than assault, has baffled many. Affray carries a maximum jail sentence of just 3 years and two men were knocked unconscious in the fight, suggesting a much more serious charge might have been more appropriate. For some reason, minutes before the start of the trial, prosecutors sought to lay two additional, more serious, charges against Stokes. But they were too late. Judge Peter Blair QC said introducing the counts of assault occasioning actual bodily harm, an offense carrying a sentence of up to 5 years in jail, would be unfair on Stokes and his legal team so close to the trial. He said it was hard to see how the defense could have objected if the new charges had been added at a pre-trial hearing in February, but Stokes's legal team had prepared for a trial on an affray charge and should not be ambushed with a last-minute change. Of course, even if the additional charges had been brought, there is no suggestion that the outcome would have been any different. Stokes would still have been able to claim that he acted in self-defense. But the late change of tack does raise questions about how the prosecution case was managed from the outset. Police sources have said that they wanted Stokes to be charged with ABH, rather than affray, right from the start. The decision to bring the affray charge was taken by Crown Prosecution Service lawyers. A CPS spokesperson said, "The CPS keeps cases under continual review. We selected the charge of affray at the outset in accordance with the Code for Crown Prosecutors. Upon further review, we considered that additional assault charges would also be appropriate. The judge decided not to permit us to add these further charges. The original charge of affray adequately reflected the criminality of the case and we proceeded on that." Asked whether the CPS would be conducting the review of how the case was handled, the spokesperson said it would not be doing so. Why was innocent bystander in dock? In the wake of the early morning melee, 3 men were charged with affray. But halfway through the trial, the judge instructed the jury to acquit 27-year-old former serviceman Ryan Hale. He'd been knocked unconscious by Stokes, after which he was accused of arming himself with a metal pole. He had always insisted he was an innocent bystander. At the end of the prosecution case, Judge Peter Blair QC told jurors that he had considered whether they would be able to find that Mr. Hale used or threatened unlawful violence. There hasn't been any evidence whatsoever that he did so, the judge told them, adding that Mr. Hale could be seen removing his t-shirt to put under the head of his friend, who had been knocked senseless to the road surface by Stokes. Police sources have claimed that they did not want to pursue the case against Mr. Hale, but were told to press ahead during early consultation meetings with the CPS last year. Mr. Hale's solicitor told the Mail that he struggles to understand how he ended up as a defendant in the case, rather than the victim of an unlawful assault. As England's Alex Hales walked free? While Mr. Hale may have found himself in the dock, Stokes's teammate Alex Hales was notable by his absence. This is despite the fact that he was seen on CCTV kicking Mr. Ali in the head while he lay on the floor injured. Hales was questioned under caution, but never arrested. I struggle to understand how the Crown, in adopting the stance they have come to the conclusion that overt acts of direct violence used by an individual to someone on the floor is not worthy of prosecution. Stephen Mooney, representing Hale, told the judge in the absence of the jury. In his closing speech, 29-year-old Hale's alleged involvement was further highlighted by Stokes's own barrister, Gordon Cole QC. He suggested that Hales could, in fact, have been responsible for Ollie's injuries, including a shattered eye socket. Hales also faces accusations that he lied to police. On the night, when approached by a uniformed officer who had just arrested all-rounder Stokes, he said he did not witness the fight and only turned up after the fracas had finished. An Avon and Somerset police spokesman said of the decision not to charge Hales, early investigative advice was sought from the CPS in relation to Alex Hales's involvement and a decision was made at a senior level to take no further action against him. The decision was made by the detective inspector following the early advice from the CPS. But a CPS spokeswoman said in a statement, "The decision to charge Ryan Hale was taken in accordance with the Code for Crown Prosecutors, that there was sufficient evidence to charge and that it was in the public interest to do so." The CPS was not asked to make a charging decision in respect of Alex Hales. Why can't anyone recall what went on? To say that there were gaps in the memories of those involved in the fracas would be something of an understatement. While Ben Stokes was able to remember well enough to refute claims he had called a bouncer a C, mocked his tattoos and mocked the two gay men, there were plenty of other blanks. For example, he could not recall flicking a cigarette butt at the two gay men, despite the action being caught on CCTV. Nor could he recall mimicking their camp actions, something that Mr. Berry and Mr. O'Connor confirmed Stokes had indeed done in their interview in The Sun following his acquittal. Nor could he remember the exact words that he claimed to overhear Mr. Ali and Mr. Hale direct at Mr. Berry and Mr. O'Connor. He knew they were homophobic, indeed, he described them as nasty homophobic abuse in a letter drafted by his solicitor, but, as to the precise words, not a clue. In fact, the phrase used, the gay friends claimed, was batty boys, a derogatory term for homosexuals. He could not remember knocking Mr. Ali unconscious, nor could he remember who he telephoned, his wife or his agent, after being arrested and taken to the police station. "Mr. Stokes, you seem to have a really significant memory blackout," prosecuting barrister Nicholas Corsella suggested to him at Bristol Crown Court. Stokes replied, "You could say that, yes." Given that Stokes had consumed at least 10 alcoholic drinks on that night, including pints of lager, vodka and lemonades and Jager bombs, was it because he was actually really very drunk? Stokes strongly denied that was the case, adding, "I think the whole incident would have been clouded because it was such. There was a lot of people around. A lot of shouting. I don't remember every little detail which has gone on that night." Mr. Ali, meanwhile, had a similar problem recalling the details of the night. He told jurors his memory of the evening was incomplete due to the head injury he suffered when he was knocked out. As for Mr. Hale, in a statement to police, he said he had suffered a mini-stroke a month before the incident. As a result, his short-term memory was not good. Why didn't witnesses give court evidence? Gay friends Kai Berry, 27, and William O'Connor, 21, were the individuals at the heart of the case. Yet they barely featured in the trial, being mentioned only in passing. Their statements were not read to the jury and they were not called to give evidence. There was plenty they could have helped to clear up, on oath, had they actually been asked. Had Stokes been bullying them over their camp mannerisms, as the prosecution claimed? Or had Stokes, in fact, been their savior, stepping in to shield them from cruel jibes? Neither the